Winter did not announce itself with a single dramatic moment. There was no day when the world suddenly turned hostile, no instant when the ground froze and life stopped. Instead, winter arrived as a gradual narrowing of options. First, the daylight shortened, then the journeys grew fewer, then the meals began to repeat. In the northern lands where the Vikings lived, winter was not simply a season of snow and darkness. It was a long accounting period, a slow reckoning between what had been stored and how long the cold intended to stay. Every household, every body carried an invisible calculation forward through the months ahead. How many days of food were left? How much strength could be spent today? How little could be eaten without weakening tomorrow? By midwinter, these questions no longer needed to be spoken aloud. They lived quietly in the hands that prepared the food, in the careful cutting of portions, in the silence that surrounded the evening meal. The idea of hunger for these people was very different from what it is today. It was not a sudden pain, not an emergency that demanded immediate resolution. Hunger was expected, it was paced, it was managed like the tide or the wind. The goal was not to eliminate it, but to keep it from growing too strong. Food in winter was no longer a source of pleasure or variety. It became something closer to fuel, something measured not by taste, but by how long it could keep the body warm when movement stopped, when darkness pressed in, and when the night stretched longer than memory. There were no fresh harvests waiting just beyond the frost, no green growth hiding under the snow. What existed had already been gathered, dried, salted, smoked, or stored months earlier. Winter meals were echoes of summer decisions. Each bite carried time inside it. Fat held heat, protein held strength, salt held preservation. Nothing else mattered. During the day, the body still worked. Tools were repaired. Animals were tended if any remained alive. Nets were checked. Wood was moved. These tasks were not dramatic. They did not feel heroic. They were slow, habitual motions meant to justify the calories that would be consumed later, because in winter, every action needed to earn its place. As the light faded early, the world contracted. Movement became unnecessary. Conversation grew sparse. People did not rush toward the evening meal with excitement. There was no ceremony, no celebration. Eating was simply another quiet task, like closing a door or settling into a familiar place. The food itself rarely changed. The same textures returned again and again. The same smells clung to the air. The body learned to recognize them without thought. This repetition was not considered deprivation, it was stability. Variety was a luxury that winter did not allow. Inside the body, something else was happening. As night approached, digestion became a form of labor. The heat generated from food was as valuable as any fire. Fat slowed the loss of warmth. Dense meals carried the body through long hours of stillness. Sleep in winter was not deep and careless, it was attentive. The body listened to itself. Breathing stayed shallow. Movement stayed minimal. The goal was not rest alone, but conservation. In these long nights, the boundary between eating and sleeping blurred. Food was no longer about daytime energy alone. It was preparation for darkness. Outside, the landscape offered no comfort. Snow absorbed sound. Wind erased tracks. Darkness arrived early and left late, but inside the rhythm remained steady. Eat a little, move a little, wait. Winter survival was not a battle. It was an agreement to accept less, to slow down, to endure repetition without resistance. The Vikings did not overcome winter through strength or defiance. They endured it through patience, through habits refined over generations, through an understanding that the season would pass only if it was not rushed. They did not ask winter to be kind, they asked only to remain alive until it loosened its grip. And so, night after night, meal after meal, they moved through the darkest weeks of the year, not with hope of abundance, but with trust in the quiet systems that sustained them. Food eaten without joy, sleep taken without comfort, days passed without urgency. This is not a story of feasts or firelight or triumph. It is a story of what people ate when eating became an act of survival, and how the slow, unremarkable rhythm of winter meals carried human life through the longest nights of the North. As the darkness settles, the body waits, and the season continues. Why, when the first true weeks of winter settled in, nothing appeared to change all at once. The land still looked familiar. The houses stood where they always had. The paths between them were still visible beneath thin layers of frost. But inside each household, something subtle had already shifted. The rhythm of the day had slowed. Morning arrived quietly. There was no urgency to rise early, no long list of tasks waiting in the cold air. The light, when it came, was pale and brief, as if it were only passing through. People woke not because the day demanded it, but because the body had rested long enough and could remain still no longer. The first movements were small, a shift of weight, a hand reaching for familiar tools, a pause before standing as if the body were checking how much energy it could afford to spend. Winter taught restraint long before it taught endurance. Food was never prepared in a rush. There was no reason for speed. What mattered was precision. Portions were cut carefully, not by weight, but by memory. The hands remembered how much had been eaten the day before. They remembered how long the food had lasted last winter. They remembered mistakes. A piece of dried meat was separated from the rest and returned to its place. Not today, not yet. Meals during these early winter days were quiet and functional. People ate standing or sitting where they happened to be. There was no gathering around food, no sense of occasion. Eating was folded into the day like any other task: chew, swallow, stop. The body responded slowly. There was no surge of warmth, no feeling of fullness. Instead, there was a mild easing of the hollow inside, just enough to allow work to continue. Outside, the cold remained patient. It did not press too hard at first. It allowed people to adjust, to slow themselves gradually. Breath appeared in the air, then lingered longer than before. Fingers stiffened sooner. Tools felt heavier even when they were not. The work of the day reflected this change. Nothing new was begun. Winter was not a season for starting. It was a season for maintaining what already existed. Nets were checked even though no fish would be caught for weeks. The habit mattered more than the result. Tools were cleaned, repaired, adjusted, then set back in place. Wood was moved closer to the shelter, not because it was needed immediately, but because distance would matter later. Every movement was deliberate, measured against the food already eaten and the food still remaining. As the hours passed, the light thinned. Shadows stretched across the ground, then blended together until they were indistinguishable. The day did not end suddenly, it simply faded. Inside, the smell of stored food lingered constantly: salt, smoke, fat. These scents did not invite hunger. They reminded the body of limits. They marked the space as one of containment, where nothing was wasted and nothing was taken for granted. There was no conversation about how long winter would last. Everyone already knew the answer, long enough to require discipline. The second meal of the day, if it could be called that, was even smaller than the first. A piece broken in half, a pause before finishing it. The act of stopping was as important as the act of eating. Hunger was allowed to remain faint and controlled. It sharpened awareness. It slowed movement. It encouraged stillness. In winter, these were not disadvantages. As the day drew toward evening, the body began to change its priorities. Energy was no longer spent freely. Tasks were left unfinished if they could wait. Sitting became preferable to standing. Silence replaced conversation. The cold outside deepened, but inside the body, warmth was conserved through stillness. Muscles relaxed, breath slowed. The body learned again how to exist with less. These early winter days were not the hardest. That would come later, but they were the most important. They set the pattern. Eat a little, move a little, wait. Time passed differently now. Without long days or varied tasks, hours lost their edges. Morning blended into afternoon. Afternoon dissolved into evening. What remained was a steady progression toward darkness. And darkness in winter was not an interruption. It was the main state. As night approached, people prepared not for sleep but for endurance. Bedding was adjusted. Layers were arranged carefully. Nothing was left to chance. The body would need to generate warmth slowly, steadily, without interruption. The last small portion of food was eaten without thought. It had already been accounted for. Its role was clear. It would work through the night, quietly turning stored energy into heat. There was no satisfaction in this knowledge, only acceptance. When the body finally rested, it did so lightly. Sleep came in shallow waves. Awareness never disappeared entirely. The cold was always present, just beyond the skin, waiting for carelessness. But carelessness did not come. These were the first calculations of winter, simple, repeated, effective. They did not feel dramatic or difficult. They felt necessary, and necessity, once accepted, was easy to follow. Outside, the land settled deeper into silence. Inside, the rhythm held. The season continued. As winter deepened, the days lost their individuality. One morning no longer felt distinct from the next. There were no markers to separate them, no changes in routine large enough to be remembered later. Time flattened, spreading evenly across the season. People woke when the body decided it was time. There was no clock to obey, only a sense of stiffness that signaled enough rest had passed. Rising from sleep took longer now. Joints resisted movement. Muscles stretched slowly, cautiously, as if testing the air before committing to it. The first breath of the day always carried the same sharpness. Cold settled inside the lungs, then faded as breathing found its rhythm. There was no surprise in this sensation anymore. The body expected it and adjusted without complaint. Clothing was layered methodically. Each piece served a purpose. Nothing decorative remained. Fabric was chosen for familiarity, for how it moved with the body, for how it trapped warmth without restricting motion. These decisions were not conscious. They were habits formed over years, refined each winter. The day began without ceremony. Food was addressed early, not because hunger was strongest in the morning, but because it required clarity. Decisions about eating were easier before the body grew tired. A small portion was prepared, measured by hand and eye rather than by desire. The same foods returned again and again. Dried meat hard and darkened by time. Fat stored carefully, used sparingly. Fish preserved until its original form was barely recognizable. These foods no longer carried meaning beyond function. They were no longer connected to the sea, the hunt, or the past. They existed only in the present moment as fuel. Eating was slow, chewing took time, the jaw worked steadily, rhythmically. There was no rush to finish. The body needed the act of eating to last, to provide warmth through movement as much as through digestion. Afterward, the hands were wiped, the remaining food stored away. Nothing was left exposed. Even small losses mattered now. Outside, the day unfolded quietly. The sun rose low and stayed there, barely clearing the horizon. Light did not travel far. It pooled weakly on the ground, unable to reach into corners or shadows. Movement outdoors was limited. Tasks were chosen carefully, weighed against the cost of cold and effort. If something could wait, it waited. Winter punished unnecessary motion. Those who stepped outside moved with purpose. They did not wander. Paths were followed exactly as they had been before. Deviating meant breaking through snow, spending energy that would not be recovered. Breath fogged the air and lingered. Sounds traveled differently now, softened by snow, absorbed by distance. Voices were kept low. Communication was brief. Words were not wasted on explanations when gestures would suffice. Inside, the shelter remained still. Heat was precious. Doors were opened only when necessary, closed carefully behind each movement. Air changed slowly, thick with the familiar smells of stored food, smoke, and bodies sharing space. The body adjusted to this environment over time. Extremities learned to tolerate numbness. Sensation faded from fingers and toes, then returned gradually when movement resumed. Pain was rare, discomfort was constant. Hunger lived quietly beneath the surface. It did not dominate attention. It was like a background sound, always present but rarely noticed unless it changed. Meals kept it contained, never eliminated. As the day progressed, the sense of effort increased. Tasks that had felt manageable in the morning now required pauses. Sitting became more frequent. Standing was done with intention. The body conserved energy without instruction. The mind followed the body's lead. Thoughts slowed. Plans shrank to the scale of hours rather than days. There was no reason to imagine the future beyond nightfall. Memory also shifted. The mind held on to repetition rather than events. What mattered was not what happened today, but that today matched yesterday closely enough to be safe. Midday passed almost unnoticed. The light changed so little that it was difficult to mark its peak. There was no signal to stop working, only a gradual sense that enough had been done. Another small portion of food was taken, smaller than the first. The body accepted it without protest. There was no thought of asking for more. Eating no longer brought pleasure, but it brought reassurance. It confirmed that the system still worked, that the stored food remained, that the rhythm held. As afternoon faded, activity slowed further. Tools were set aside earlier than they might have been in warmer seasons. There was no advantage in pushing through fatigue. Winter rewarded restraint. People remained close to one another, not out of affection, but practicality. Shared warmth mattered. Movement within the space was minimal, careful not to disturb others unnecessarily. The air grew quieter as evening approached. The absence of light reduced the need for sight. Hearing became more important. Small sounds, the settling of wood, the shift of fabric, the steady breathing of others marked the passing time. Food was prepared again, though prepared was an imprecise word. It involved little more than dividing what already existed. Portions were aligned with what the body would need through the night. This meal carried more weight than the others. It was not larger, but it was timed. Its purpose extended beyond the present moment. It would work while the body rested, producing warmth in stillness. Eating was unhurried. Conversation, if it occurred at all, was brief and practical. There was no need to fill the space with sound. Silence did not feel empty, it felt efficient. As darkness settled fully, the world outside disappeared. There was no view to observe, no changes to track. Winter nights were uniform. They offered no information. Inside, preparations continued. Bedding was arranged carefully. Layers were adjusted. Bodies were positioned close enough to share warmth without discomfort. Sleep arrived gradually. It did not overtake the body. It seeped in slowly, interrupted by small adjustments, shifts in position, brief moments of waking awareness. The body did not surrender completely. Some part of it remained attentive, monitoring temperature, breath, and pressure. This vigilance was automatic, learned over many winters. Dreams, if they came, were indistinct. The mind did not travel far, it stayed close to the body, anchored in sensation rather than story. Night passed without incident. Toward morning, awareness increased slightly. The body sensed the approach of light before it appeared. Hunger stirred faintly, not as urgency but as reminder. Another day waited, identical to the one before. The pattern held. By the time winter had fully settled, food was no longer thought of as something that belonged to the present moment. It had become something stretched across days and nights, something that connected one sunrise to the next without interruption. Each portion carried not only nourishment but duration. The body learned this first. After weeks of repetition, digestion slowed. Warmth from food no longer arrived quickly, but spread gradually like heat seeping through stone. The body adapted to this pace without resistance. It no longer expected immediate comfort. It accepted delayed reward. Morning began again, as it always did, without urgency. The body rose reluctantly, stiffness easing only after several careful movements. The air inside the shelter felt heavier now, thick with accumulated warmth and scent. Smoke lingered faintly, even when no fire was active. The smell of stored food never left. The first task of the day was always the same: assess the body. Hands flexed slowly, fingers tested sensation, shoulders rolled to judge how much strength was available. The body answered in quiet signals, not words. Today would allow a little work, tomorrow perhaps less. Only after this silent exchange did food enter the picture. A small portion was taken, separated from the rest with deliberate care. The remaining stores were left untouched, their presence acknowledged but not disturbed. Looking too long invited unnecessary thought. Eating was unhurried. The jaw worked steadily, rhythmically. Each bite took time to break down, to warm in the mouth before being swallowed. This slowness was intentional. It allowed heat to build gradually, evenly, without spikes or drops. Afterward, the body waited. It waited for warmth to settle. It waited for strength to return. It waited for clarity. Only then did movement resume. Work in deep winter had little variety. There were no large projects, no expansions or improvements. The focus was on preservation. What existed needed to remain intact until the season loosened its hold. Clothing was repaired repeatedly. Small tears were addressed immediately, never postponed. A gap in fabric meant heat loss, and heat loss meant hunger arriving sooner than planned. These connections were understood instinctively. Tools were maintained even when unused. A blade dulled by neglect would demand more energy later. Winter did not forgive inefficiency. Outside, the landscape had simplified. Snow erased detail. Familiar paths blended into their surroundings. Distance became difficult to judge. Those who stepped out did so with attention fixed forward, eyes scanning the ground for subtle markers. Movement through snow was slow and deliberate. Each step pressed weight downward, compacting the surface. Lifting the foot required effort. Walking became a negotiation between progress and conservation. Breathing deepened outdoors, not from exertion alone, but from cold tightening the chest. The air felt sharper now, drier. Inhaling required intention. Exhaling produced thick clouds that hung briefly before dissolving. The body responded by shortening movement. Tasks were completed efficiently, then ended. There was no benefit in lingering. Inside again, warmth returned gradually. Fingers tingled as sensation crept back. This moment was familiar, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. It was simply part of the cycle. As midday approached, hunger stirred faintly. Not enough to demand attention, but enough to be acknowledged. Another portion was taken, smaller than the first. The body accepted it without complaint. This meal did not interrupt the day. It fit into it seamlessly, like a pause between breaths. The rhythm remained unbroken. Time behaved differently now. Without clear markers, hours slid past unnoticed. The mind stopped counting. What mattered was not how long the day lasted, but that it passed without incident. The body grew accustomed to this quiet continuity. Muscles remained relaxed for longer periods. The mind wandered less. Thought narrowed to immediate sensation, warmth, pressure, breath. As afternoon faded, activity slowed naturally. The light weakened further, thinning until it barely reached the edges of the space. Shadows deepened but no longer drew attention. Darkness was expected. Food preparation in the late hours was methodical. Portions were aligned carefully. Nothing was wasted. The act of dividing food had become precise, almost ritualized, though no ceremony surrounded it. The final meal of the day carried particular importance. Its timing mattered more than its size. Eaten too early, it would leave the body cold before morning. Too late, and digestion would disrupt rest. Experience guided this balance. Eating occurred in near silence. The sound of chewing was muted, absorbed by the space. Breathing slowed as warmth settled in. The body recognized what was happening and began to prepare for stillness. Outside, night took full control. There was no gradual transition anymore. Darkness arrived complete and absolute. Inside, movement ceased almost entirely. People positioned themselves carefully, adjusting layers, aligning bodies to share warmth without pressure. Each adjustment was small, deliberate. Sleep arrived slowly. It did not overwhelm, it enveloped. The body remained aware of itself even as rest deepened. Temperature was monitored unconsciously. Muscles shifted subtly when needed. Breath found a steady rhythm. Digestion worked quietly through the night. producing heat steadily, predictably. Food fulfilled its role without drawing attention to itself. Time passed unnoticed. Near morning, awareness returned slightly, not enough to wake fully, but enough to sense continuation. Hunger hovered faintly, restrained. Another day waited. The cycle held. By the heart of winter, the body no longer questioned its circumstances. It had learned the boundaries within which it could exist, and it stayed carefully inside them. Hunger, cold, fatigue, none of these disappeared, but they softened into predictable shapes. Morning arrived again without urgency. Waking was slow, unforced. The body surfaced from rest gradually, awareness spreading from the chest outward to the limbs. Fingers moved first, testing sensation. Toes followed, stiff but cooperative. The air inside the shelter felt dense, layered with the warmth of bodies that had remained close through the night. The cold stayed just beyond reach, pressed against walls and seams, patient and unmoving. Getting up required intention. Weight shifted carefully. Joints responded reluctantly, then eased. The body did not rush. It knew rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes cost energy. Clothing was adjusted piece by piece. Layers were not added or removed lightly. Each decision considered warmth, mobility, and effort. The body had learned exactly how much protection it needed to remain still without wasting energy. Food came next, as it always did. The portion was small, familiar. The hand reached for it without hesitation, without desire. There was no expectation of satisfaction, only function. Eating began slowly, the rhythm unchanging. Chewing warmed the mouth. Swallowing brought a faint sense of grounding. The stomach accepted the food quietly, without demand for more. Digestion had become efficient, deliberate. After eating, the body remained still for a time. Movement resumed only when warmth began to spread. This waiting was part of the process now, as essential as the meal itself. Outside, the world remained unchanged. Snow lay undisturbed where no one had passed. The sky held a pale, indifferent light. The sun climbed low, barely altering the landscape. Those who stepped outside did so briefly. Tasks were chosen for necessity alone. A short walk to check an animal, a careful retrieval of stored materials. Nothing more. Movement through the cold felt heavier now, not because strength was gone, but because the body refused to waste it. Steps shortened, breathing deepened. The body negotiated every action, calculating its cost. Hands worked slowly, fingers stiff within gloves or wraps. Dexterity diminished, replaced by patience. Tasks that once took minutes now took longer, but they were completed without strain. Returning inside brought relief, though not comfort. Warmth returned gradually, tingling at the edges of sensation. The body accepted this without reaction. It had learned not to crave it. The day continued in this restrained manner. Hours passed quietly. There was little to mark their passage. Light shifted almost imperceptibly. Sounds remained muted. Hunger returned at predictable intervals. It never surprised the body. Another small portion was taken when the time felt right. Not too early, not too late. Eating remained deliberate. Each bite served its purpose. The body recognized the pattern and responded accordingly. As the afternoon wore on, energy declined slightly. Tasks slowed further. Sitting replaced standing. Silence lengthened. The mind followed the body's pace. Thoughts grew fewer. Planning beyond the day felt unnecessary. Winter discouraged excess imagination. Memory itself adapted. The mind stopped storing individual days. They blurred together, forming a continuous stretch of similar sensations. This was not confusion, it was efficiency. Toward evening, preparation for night began early. There was no advantage in waiting. Bedding was adjusted carefully. Layers were arranged with practiced precision. The final meal of the day was prepared with the same care as always. Its role was understood. It would sustain warmth through stillness, through hours when movement ceased entirely. Eating took place slowly in near silence. Breathing deepened, muscles relaxed. The body recognized the signals and began its descent toward rest. Outside, darkness enveloped everything without transition. The night did not deepen, it simply existed. Inside, bodies settled into positions that minimized heat loss. Contact was adjusted until warmth was shared evenly. No one spoke. Sound was unnecessary. Sleep arrived in stages. The body hovered at the edge of rest, awareness fading and returning gently. Shifts in position occurred without waking fully. Breath remained steady. Digestion continued its work quietly, converting stored energy into warmth. This process had become reliable, almost invisible. Time passed without acknowledgement. Near morning, awareness stirred faintly. Hunger registered as a distant presence, contained. The body did not react. The pattern remained intact. Another day waited, indistinguishable from the last. By this point in the winter, the rhythm no longer needed attention. It held on its own. Days passed without resistance, not because they were easy, but because nothing about them required debate. The body had accepted the pattern fully. Hunger arrived when expected, cold pressed in only as far as it was allowed. Fatigue settled and lifted in familiar waves. Morning came again, quietly. The body surfaced from sleep without urgency, awareness spreading slowly. There was no sharp transition between rest and waking. The two states overlapped gently. Eyes opened, then closed again for a moment, then opened once more. Breath found its pace before movement followed. Getting up was a practice sequence: shift weight, sit, pause, stand. Each step gave the body time to respond, to confirm balance and warmth before continuing. No energy was wasted on sudden motion. The shelter felt unchanged. The same air, the same muted light filtering through small openings, the same soft sounds of others breathing, moving, existing nearby. The body registered these things without thought. Familiarity required no analysis. Food followed, not as a desire, not even as hunger, but as schedule. The portion was taken as it always was. Hands moved with certainty. There was no hesitation, no reconsideration. Eating unfolded slowly. The mouth worked methodically. The jaw moved with a steady rhythm that had become almost soothing. Warmth built gradually, first in the chest, then spreading outward. The body waited, as it always did, allowing digestion to take hold before movement resumed. Outside, winter remained still and unchanged. Snow reflected what little light there was. The sky showed no intention of offering more. Wind came and went, but it carried nothing new. Those who stepped outside did so rarely now. Only tasks that could not be delayed remained. Even then they were approached cautiously. Cold no longer shocked the body. It was absorbed gradually, pressing inward until resisted by layers and habit. Breathing adjusted automatically. Steps shortened. Hands worked within known limits. The body no longer fought the cold. It cooperated with it, minimizing exposure, reducing effort, accepting numbness when necessary. Returning inside brought no dramatic relief. Warmth returned slowly, predictably. Sensation crept back into fingers and toes. The body accepted this without reaction. Time continued its quiet passage. The day held little activity. Sitting became the default. Standing was reserved for purpose. Movement within the shelter was minimal, careful not to disturb others or waste heat. Hunger surfaced again, right on schedule. Another small portion was taken. The body received it calmly, with no sense. As the day moved toward evening, there was no clear moment when work ended and rest began. The transition was gradual, almost imperceptible. Activity slowed, then thinned, then dissolved entirely. Light faded early, as it always did now. It did not withdraw dramatically. It simply weakened, losing its ability to define shapes. Surfaces softened, corners disappeared. What remained was a dim continuity that required little attention. The body responded before the mind did. Movement shortened, steps became fewer. Standing felt unnecessary unless purpose demanded it. Sitting, leaning, remaining still, all of these became natural choices, made without thought. Hunger returned once more, predictable and contained. The body recognized the signal immediately, without urgency. This was not the sharp hunger of scarcity, but the steady reminder of rhythm. Food was divided again. Hands moved carefully, separating portions with practiced precision. There was no measuring, no comparison. The body already knew what would be enough to carry it through the night. Eating began slowly. The sound of chewing was muted, absorbed by the space. Breathing deepened, then steadied. Warmth began its quiet spread from the center outward. This meal felt different from the others, not because it was larger or richer, but because of when it occurred. It belonged to the night rather than the day. Its purpose extended beyond waking hours. The body received it with awareness. As digestion began, muscles relaxed further, shoulders lowered, the jaw loosened. The body started to release what little tension remained from the day. Conversation, if it occurred at all, was minimal. Words were used only when necessary. Silence was not avoided, it was shared. Outside, darkness settled fully. The world beyond the shelter ceased to offer information. There was nothing to observe, nothing to anticipate. Inside, the environment became even more still. Small sounds took on significance: the shift of fabric, the settling of wood, the steady rhythm of breathing nearby. The body adjusted position carefully, aligning itself to conserve heat. Knees bent slightly, arms folded closer. Contact with others was adjusted subtly, finding balance between closeness and comfort. Bedding was arranged again, though it had already been arranged countless times before. Each adjustment was small, almost automatic. The body knew where warmth gathered and where it escaped. As stillness deepened, awareness softened. Thought slowed until it became indistinct. The mind no longer formed plans or reflections. It remained close to sensation, pressure, warmth, breath. Sleep approached gradually. It did not arrive as a single event. It seeped in, spreading quietly through the body. The first stage was heaviness. Limbs felt weighted, anchored. Movement seemed unnecessary, even inconvenient. Then came narrowing. Sounds grew distant. Sensation dulled at the edges. Awareness contracted inward. The body did not surrender completely. Some part of it remained alert, monitoring temperature, adjusting breath, shifting position when needed. This vigilance was gentle, habitual. Digestion continued its work steadily. Heat was produced slowly, consistently. The body relied on this process now more than on any external source. Time passed unnoticed. The night held no interruptions. No changes demanded response. The darkness remained uniform, offering no variation. Occasionally, the body shifted slightly, a knee moved, an arm adjusted. These movements occurred without waking fully, guided by sensation rather than thought. Breathing remained slow and even. The chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, synchronized unconsciously with those nearby. The cold pressed in from outside but did not penetrate far. Layers, proximity, and habit held it at bay. Sleep deepened, then lightened, then deepened again. The body moved through these states without awareness of transition. Dreams, if they appeared, were indistinct. They carried no narrative, no images that lingered. The mind stayed close to the body, anchored in the present. Near what would have been the middle of the night, awareness surfaced briefly. Not enough to wake fully, but enough to register continued existence. The body remained warm enough. Hunger stayed contained. Nothing required action. Awareness faded again. The night continued uninterrupted. The body remained aware in fragments, not of time, not of place, but of balance, of warmth retained and warmth lost, of breath moving without effort, of pressure where fabric met skin. Somewhere in the night a subtle shift occurred, not a sound loud enough to wake, but a change in the density of silence. The air felt heavier, colder, or perhaps the body had cooled slightly, enough to register the difference. Without opening eyes, without thought, the body responded. A shoulder drew inward, a foot slid closer to the core. Fabric was pulled tighter, not deliberately, but through the smallest possible motion. The adjustment was efficient, economical. Breathing adjusted as well. Inhalations grew marginally deeper, exhalations slower. Heat was conserved not through effort, but through alignment. The night offered no resistance. Sleep continued in layers. At times it deepened into complete absence. At other moments it thinned just enough for sensation to return briefly, and each that resolved itself, a pressure that shifted, a breath that paused and resumed. These moments passed without memory. The body did not measure the night. It did not mark hours or anticipate morning. It existed entirely within the present state of being warm enough. Outside, the cold persisted. Wind may have moved across the land, but it did not announce itself here. The shelter absorbed its presence, muting it to a distant pressure. Inside, stillness was nearly complete. Occasionally, another body nearby adjusted as well, a synchronized movement barely perceptible, a shared rhythm maintained without coordination. The body registered this not as awareness of another person, but as a change in shared warmth, a redistribution, a subtle recalibration. Sleep adapted. At some point, the digestive warmth faded slightly. The body noticed the change not as hunger but as cooling. The response was immediate and unconscious. Muscles drew in again. The spine curved more fully. The chin lowered closer to the chest. Every posture served one purpose now: preservation. Dreaming remained shallow. Images did not form clearly. If memory surfaced at all, it did so as sensation rather than story. The memory of warmth, the echo of a repetitive task, the feeling of hands moving in familiar ways. These fragments drifted through the mind and dissolved. Breathing continued its slow cycle. The body trusted it completely. There was no fear of stopping, no urgency to control it. Time passed without distinction. At the coldest point of the night, awareness returned more distinctly. not enough to wake, but enough to assess. The body scanned itself briefly. Hands were numb but functional. Feet were cool but not painful. The core remained warm. This assessment concluded quickly. There was nothing to change. Sleep reclaimed the body again, gently, without resistance. The night remained intact. No sounds of animals, no distant movement, no signal from the outside world. The environment held its breath. Inside, the body entered a deeper stillness. Muscles slackened further. The jaw loosened completely. The tongue rested heavily. Breathing slowed again, settling into a rhythm so steady it became imperceptible. Heat generation became minimal, just enough to maintain balance. The body operated at its most efficient state. The mind withdrew almost entirely. What remained was sensation without interpretation, pressure without meaning, warmth without emotion. The night extended, unbroken. Eventually, something changed. Not light, not sound, but texture. The air felt different against the skin, less sharp, slightly softer. The body registered this without waking. Breathing shifted subtly in response. The inhale felt marginally easier. The chest expanded a fraction more. This was not morning yet, not even close, but it was the beginning of change. Sleep lightened just enough to allow the body to adjust once more. A leg straightened slightly, a shoulder rolled. These movements were slower now, heavier. The body had been still for a long time. Afterward, stillness returned. The night continued to hold, but its grip had loosened. The body remained asleep. The night no longer pressed as firmly as before. It was still cold, still dark, but the weight of it had shifted. The silence felt thinner, less absolute. The body sensed this change without understanding it. Sleep loosened its hold. Not enough to wake fully, but enough for awareness to drift closer to the surface. The mind did not form thoughts. It simply hovered, suspended between rest and presence. Breathing adjusted again. Inhales grew slightly fuller, as if the air itself offered less resistance. Exhales carried a faint warmth that lingered just a moment longer before dispersing. The body remained curled, conserving heat out of habit now rather than necessity. Muscles held their shape without effort. Joints rested where they had been for hours. There was a sense of having been still for a very long time. Somewhere nearby, fabric shifted softly, not abruptly, just the quiet sound of weight redistributing. The body registered it as reassurance rather than interruption. Warmth remained shared. The skin along the arms felt dry. The face, partially exposed, sensed cooler air moving across it in gentle currents. The contrast did not disturb sleep, it defined it. Dreams surfaced briefly, then faded. They were not stories. They carried no faces, no voices. Only sensations repeated themselves. The steady scrape of wood against wood, the weight of something carried, the memory of warmth after cold. These impressions drifted through the mind like breath fogging in the dark, then vanished. The body continued to lie still. Time moved quietly. At some point, the cold retreated another step, not enough to be called warmth, but enough to change the texture of the air. It no longer beat at exposed skin. Instead, it rested there, neutral. The chest rose and fell with deeper ease. The body responded by releasing tension it no longer needed. Fingers uncurled slightly, toes relaxed. The spine lengthened just a fraction. These movements were slow, heavy, as if taking place underwater. Sleep shifted again, becoming lighter but wider. Awareness expanded, touching more of the body at once: the weight of blankets, the firmness beneath, the faint ache in muscles that had labored the day before. None of it demanded attention. The body accepted these sensations as part of itself. Breathing remained steady, a rhythm shaped by hours of rest rather than intention. Outside, the world began to prepare for change, though nothing yet announced it. No birds called, no wind stirred. The land held its silence carefully. Inside, the body hovered in a state of waiting it did not recognize. The mind did not anticipate morning. It simply followed the body where it led. A slight pressure in the bladder registered faintly, then receded as sleep settled back over it. The body noted it, stored the information, and returned to stillness. Energy remained low, heat production minimal. The body existed in balance. The air felt marginally damp now, carrying a hint of moisture. It brushed across the face, the hands, bringing with it a subtle sense of outside space. This sensation lingered longer than the others had. Sleep did not deepen fully again. Instead, it thinned into a quiet resting state. Not waking, not dreaming, just being. The body lay suspended there, breath by breath. Each inhale drew in cooler air. Each exhale released warmth that softened the space immediately around the mouth and nose. The cycle repeated without effort. Gradually, posture shifted once more. A knee lowered, a shoulder rolled back slightly. The body opened itself a little, no longer needing to fold inward so tightly. These changes happened slowly, over many breaths. The mind remained calm, unengaged. There was no urgency, no reason to rise, no sound calling for attention, only the gradual easing of the night. The darkness remained, but it felt less dense, less complete, as if space itself had widened. The body sensed this, holding on to sleep but no longer sinking deeper into it. Rest continued, quiet and unbroken. The body rested in a state that was no longer fully asleep but not yet waking. It lingered there naturally, as if waiting for something it did not name. Breath remained steady, slightly deeper now, filling the lower chest before easing back out. The sound of it was barely audible, absorbed by fabric, by skin, by the quiet of the space. Warmth had evened out, not strong, not absent, just present enough that the body no longer guarded it closely. The curl of the spine loosened another degree. Time continued without markers. Somewhere in the distance, a subtle shift occurred. Not a sound exactly, more a change in pressure. The air felt different, as if it had expanded outward. The body noticed before the mind did. Eyes remained closed. Lids rested heavy and relaxed. There was no impulse to open them yet. Light, if it existed, had not announced itself strongly enough. The body lay still, sensing the surface beneath it more clearly now. The firmness, the slight unevenness, the memory of weight held for many hours. Muscles along the back registered a mild ache. Not discomfort, just evidence of use. This sensation did not disturb rest, it grounded it. Hands lay where they had settled. Fingers warm now, responsive. If they moved, they would move easily. The body knew this and chose not to act on it. Breathing remained slow. The mind drifted, touching fragments of awareness without forming them into thoughts. The impression of wood grain, the faint scent of old fabric, the memory of steam rising briefly from breath earlier in the night. These impressions passed through quietly. Outside, the night continued to thin. Darkness still covered the land, but it no longer pressed downward. It felt lighter, as if it could lift away at any moment without resistance. The body responded by shifting once more. A shoulder adjusted, the neck lengthened slightly, the chin lifted just enough to change the flow of air across the face. Coolness brushed the skin, then faded. The body accepted this without reaction. There was a sense of time approaching, though no signal had been given. Not anticipation, simply readiness. Sleep hovered lightly now, no longer pulling inward, only resting gently over awareness. If the body chose to wake, it could. If it chose to remain still, it would. Neither option carried urgency. Breath continued to guide everything. Inhale, pause, exhale. Each cycle marked the quiet movement toward morning. The air carried a faint dryness now, less dense, easier to draw in. The chest expanded with less effort. The body registered this as a sign, though it did not interpret it. Somewhere nearby, another presence stirred slightly. Not waking, just shifting weight, adjusting fabric, returning to stillness. This movement felt familiar, expected. The body remained relaxed, sharing warmth, sharing space. Time moved again. The mind drifted close to waking once more, then eased back. The balance held. No sound yet marked the outside world. No birds, no wind, only the soft, patient quiet of a winter night preparing to release its hold. The body lay within that moment, suspended between what had been and what would come next, breathing steady, muscles loose, awareness wide and calm, still resting. The night does not end all at once, it loosens. Darkness thins slowly, not enough to be called light, only enough to soften the edges of things. The world remains quiet, but its silence has changed. It is no longer holding itself still, it is simply resting. Breath continues, calm and steady. The body lies where it has been for many hours, wrapped in warmth that has settled evenly now. There is no need to shift, no need to rise. Muscles remain loose. Joints feel supported by the surface beneath them. The cold has stepped back just enough to be forgotten. Somewhere beyond the shelter, the land prepares itself. Snow holds its shape. Trees stand unmoving. The sky lightens by a shade so faint it can only be sensed, not seen. Inside, rest remains complete. The body no longer guards itself. It no longer measures warmth or counts breaths. It simply exists in balance, supported by habit, by shelter, by the quiet knowledge that this night has passed safely. Thoughts do not return yet. There is no planning, no memory of the day ahead. Only the lingering calm of having endured, of having rested, of having made it through another long winter night. Breathing slows again, deep and unforced. The chest rises, the chest falls. Each movement feels unimportant, and that is what makes it peaceful. The mind drifts gently, not into sleep, not into waking, but into something softer, a space where awareness loosens its grip, where the body leads and the mind follows without resistance. The night has done its work, it has sheltered, it has quieted, it has allowed the body to gather itself again. Nothing more is asked of it. The darkness remains for a while longer, offering one last layer of protection. The world outside stays distant and muted, inside the warmth holds. There is no moment of ending, no clear boundary where night becomes morning, only a gradual easing, a slow release. The body stays still, resting within that gentle transition, breath by breath. If sleep deepens again, that is enough. If awareness remains light, that is enough too. This space does not demand anything. it simply allows. And so for now, everything remains as it is, quiet, balanced, whole. Thank you for spending this night here. If you find yourself returning to this calm, if these quiet hours bring you rest, you are welcome to stay connected. A small gesture, a like, a comment, or subscribing helps keep these long nights available whenever you need them. For now, there is nothing to do, just rest.